go over the couple of different supplies that you need to make this project. So for our drawstring backpack type of bag, we'll need 4 pieces of fabric cut the same shape. And of course that would be a rectangular shape. You can cut your pieces whatever size works for you. Keep in mind that your final product will be about 1 inch smaller on each side total when you account for your seam allowances. So you'll need 2 pieces for the outside fabric, which for our project we're using this bookworm fabric, and then 2 pieces of your liner fabric that are cut the same. You will also need 2 small tabs, which we are going to use for anchoring our cord for the strap. I have 2 pieces of cord here that are cut to 59 inches. And you can see here I put a little bit of Scotch tape on the end of mine to keep it from unraveling. If you want to sew that, or if you want to use an actual agnet, or if you wanted to use glue or something to keep that from unraveling, those are also good options as well. And then we have a spool of matching thread, a couple of pins, a safety pin, and then a needle on our sewing machine, which is not in view right now. When I cut my piece for my bag here, I just made myself a little bit of a pattern here, and I made some notes. And so when I cut mine out, I decided to make it this size, and I also cut myself a practice piece for my tab, so mine is 3 by 4. And so that's a good way to test it out on a piece of paper before you actually cut your real piece. Before you get started, also be sure that you've given your fabric here your pre-wash so that it won't let any dye after you use it and it's done shrinking and stretching, and it's going to. And also make sure that you've given it a good press so it's nice and flat to sew on. So the first thing we're going to do is make our anchor straps, which are going to come out from the sides of our bag to hold the straps down the sides. Remember that when we are looking for which side is the right side on a solid fabric, that the right side, or in other words the outside of the fabric, is going to be the smoother part versus the inside, which is hard to see in my video, I'm sure, but it's going to be the rougher side. And so I'm going to begin by putting my right sides together, folded long ways like this. And I'm just going to sew right down this line here, and I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance for the entire project. Remember too that most sewing machines have a seam gauge here on your plate, and that measurement to the right of your needle is going to be from the center position. So if you're using that as your guide, just keep that in mind. So I'm going to sew like this, and remember to back stitch. And I'll do the other side as well. Trimmed my loose threads here, and now we want to press those seams out because we want them to lay nice and flat on the inside of our little tube here. So kind of wiggle it around so that's in the middle and iron it like this. So you'll want to press it where you kind of move it like this down the piece. And then you'll want to turn it inside out, and that's a little bit tricky. So just take your time with it. going to take a moment to get it all the way inside out, so be patient with yourself as you work on it. And it might help to kind of stick your finger in the tube to push it out the other side as you work it out like this. And as you wiggle it and pull it, it'll come right side out. Right. And as we come to the other end, you can see we have our tube ready to go. And it's right side out. And you can see how flat it lays now that we pressed it like that. And when we insert it into our bag there, it's going to be nice and secure. So now we're going to be preparing our lining, and we'll be pinning together our two pieces for our lining part. As you can see here, I have pinned around the three sides, including the bottom, but not across the top, because that's where we're going to attach it to our outside piece here, and we'll do that in a future step. So when we sew this, we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way down all three sides. When we get down to the corner here, we want to stop about a 1/2 inch from the bottom, remembering to leave room to turn it to make our seam allowance. And when we get started here, remember to back stitch, and we want to start about 1 inch from the very top. Remember to pull out your pins as you go so that you don't drive over them with your needle. And as I get down to the bottom here, remember to leave yourself about a 1/2 inch for your seam allowance along the bottom. And so you want to go a little bit slower as you decide where to stop. And it's okay to just do one stitch at a time and then turn it to check. So I'm going to stop with my needle down here, and I will turn it to see how it looks. And if I need to go a little further, I can do another stitch or two. When it looks about right, I'm going to just turn it and keep going. So now we're just going to clip the corners of our lining so that we don't have too much bulk here when we turn everything right side out. So I'm just going to take my shears here and snip the corner, being careful not to clip my stitches here. So I'll cut here, and you can see that squares it off, and then I'll cut here as well. Okay, and so now we're going to do the outside part just like we did our lining. And as you can see here with a printed fabric, it's really easy to tell which way our right sides are together. And so we're going to sew all the way around the three sides like we did before. But this time we have our tab here, so this is where we're going to loop our cord. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. I have it sandwiched in here in between. And so to put that in there, you're going to take your piece and fold it in half with our end pieces, and then in half again. And so it's in quarters like that. We're going to tuck it in right against the seam here, and about the distance from the bottom that one more tab would fit here. And so make sure your edges are together so that you'll catch that in your seam. And then we will sandwich it in here. We're going to make sure everything's all lined up, and then place a pin to hold it all together, and that should catch in our seam here. And then when we turn everything right side out, our little tab will stick out, and we'll be able to put our cord in there for our strap. When you go over it, just be careful when you go over the bulk here as not to break your needle. You might have to go a little bit slower and even turn it by hand and we'll show you how to do that so that you don't break your needle as you go. And we're just going to sew it like we did the lining. Remember to start a little distance from the very top, about an inch or so that when we turn everything right side out, it comes together. And we're going to continue to use a 1/2 inch seam just like we did on our lining here. Pulling out our pins as we go. And then as I get to this bulkier part here, I'm going to just kind of take my time. And then when it gets really thick, I'm going to turn it, the hand wheel, to move my stitches along, taking my time, making sure that I don't break my needle, and I can move my foot if I need to, just to get it over that bump. And then when you feel like it's moving smoothly, keep going, remembering to stop with enough room for your seam allowance along the bottom. And you can check it and make sure it looks right. If you need to stitch a little more, that's okay. And then keep going, just like we did before, along the bottom and the other side. Again, being careful of the bulky part where the other tab is. Okay, so now we're going to put our two pieces together with our outside and our lining. And so first we've got to turn our outside piece right side out. So we'll flip it around. Be sure that you poke out the corners really well so you have a nice crisp corner, and you can see our tabs here. And everything works great now that we've clipped the corners here, and everything looks really sharp. So just making sure you have a nice square here. And once we get it all straightened out and our tabs are all the way out, poking our corners here, use your finger or a pencil there to make sure it's a nice sharp corner. We'll be ready to put our lining in. So we're going to leave our lining so that it looks inside out, because when you look in your bag here, it's going to look right side out from the inside. So we will tuck in the corners to match the corners of the outside. Just guide it in there, make sure it's all the way in and the bottom seams go together. And then we're going to make sure that our top edges line up together so everything is pulled nice and flat. Making sure that we got it all lined up. And then we're going to turn our seams together and pin our top so that we can run our cord right through that top section there that we're going to show you. And so we have our lining. Okay, and so now we're going to pin together our top part and our bottom part so that we can make the little channel for our cord to run through. And so what I like to do is pin one and then the other. So we left our slit here so we can fit our cord in this little slot, and we want to make sure that we give it enough room. So we want to fold our seams under far enough that our cord fits in there. So about an inch or so. We're going to fold our outside towards our lining and our lining towards the outside so it looks like a nice closed sandwich. So what I do is I do one piece and then another. So I'll start with the top. And I'm going to fold it under. And then I will grab a pin and put it to hold my piece in place. And I'll do this all the way across this one side on the outside layer, putting a pin about every 2 inches or so. And then I just check my work as I go along, making sure it looks even. And if I need to make an adjustment, I can remove a pin and just adjust it slightly. It's it's okay to make adjustments as you work on this. You can always move pins around, and it's best to test it out before you put your stitches in. Then I'm just going to keep pinning all the way to the edge here. And you can see I'm just folding it under one time. And as I get to my end here, I have it all pinned. And now I'll do the lining towards the outside just the same way. So again, about 1 inch. And if I fold it here and I find that I stitched a little bit too high up on my lining, I can just take my snips or even some seam rippers and open that up for just a couple stitches. You want to make sure it's about the same as your outside piece. And it's alright if you misjudged a little when you were sewing it together. That's no big deal. I did a little bit on mine here, so I'm just going to snip it open, just clipping a few stitches there so it'll fold down as much as I need it to. And then I'm going to fold my lining towards my outside, just a mirror image of what I did before with the outside piece. And I'll pin it down every couple of inches, just like I did on the outside. And again, just like we did on the top, testing as we go, making sure it looks even, moving our pins around if we need to, as long as it works out right in the end. That's what our goal is. And then you can see I've pinned them both, and now I'm going to put both layers together, again like a sandwich, and make sure they line up right, and checking that they're even all the way across. Then I like to start in the middle to make sure I'm not bunching it up on one side or the other. So I'm going to start with my middle piece here. I'm going to hold the sandwich together, and I'm just going to pull out an extra pin that's there, and then keep the other pin to put the two pieces together. So you put it through both pieces of fabric there. So again, just set aside any extra pins. I'm going to hold it and put my pin through both layers, making sure it lines up nicely like I want it to, all the way down one side into the edge. And when I get towards the side seam here, I want to tuck under that side seam into the channel so we don't have any raw edges sticking out, but I don't want to close that side seam all the way when I sew it, because we got to get our cord through that little channel we created. Then I'll go back to my middle here, and I'll do the same thing down the other side. So again, holding my two pieces together, removing any extra pins, making sure it lines up nicely. And I find that this is the easiest way to make sure it lines up like you want it to. You can do it all as one step, but this is the simpler way to do it, I think. And then making sure that it all spaces out nicely, and just like we did on the other side, we will turn over our side seam so it's nice, and make sure it's even. And now we can see it's ready to sew on this top part, and we'll go and pin the other side just the same. So now we're going to sew our channel for our top seam here. And as you can see, we've pinned both sides, and we have left it a little bit open on the side. And I'm going to test out with my cord here and make sure I've left myself enough room to run that into this little channel I've created. So I like to test it before I start sewing in case I need to make any adjustments. And when I put it in there, I see it's going to move just fine. I'm happy with where I've placed it. If you find that it's too closed, you might need to adjust how far down you have folded your top seams so that you have a wide enough channel. But in testing mine out here, it looks like it's going to work well. And when we run that through there, we'll have plenty of space. And you can see here about how wide my channel is going to be once I sew it. And that's going to fit just fine. So we're ready to get started sewing, and I'm going to sew the bottom of the channel first, and then I'll close the top with another row of stitches. So again, remembering to start stitching right where your two side parts separate, all the way down to where you stopped sewing the side seam. So that's about an inch from the very top here. Again, leaving enough room for your cord to move smoothly. Remember to back stitch as you start. And by doing it this way, you'll catch the bottom edge of your fabric there, and it'll be nice and secure and held together. So here we go. And you can feel as you stitch that you're catching all your layers underneath here. If it feels like it's not working, it's okay to take a pin out and check your work, making sure that it didn't come unfolded as you went. But if you take your time with it, it should work just like you planned. You'll be able to sew a nice straight line that will secure your cord when we run it through for our straps. And again, just adjusting a little bit as you go, and back stitching when we get to this side seam here. And now we're ready to sew the top edge here so that we close our channel and we have a little space in the middle for our cord. And you can see here, if I lay it into the channel where it's going to go and I hold it closed, that's how it's going to fit together. And indeed, there's plenty of room there. So I'm ready to move on and sew it together here at the top. So I'll do it just the same as I did the bottom row, but this time I'm going to sew right to the edge as close as possible without running off the road there. Again, we want to back stitch as we get started here, holding our pieces together, which should be a little easier to do now that we've got our bottom row of stitches. But again, making sure that it lays down flat like it should and everything lines up accordingly. Take your time with this, making sure that you're sewing as close to the edge as you can to give your cord plenty of room in this little channel you've created for it. Double checking that it's lined up as you go. And we call this technique top stitching because it's going to be on the very top of your project where it's going to show. So we take care to do this slowly and carefully to make sure that we make it look as nice and neatly finished as possible. And as we get to the edge here where our side seam is, we're going to be sure to back stitch just like we did the bottom. So now we're going to put our cord into our casing here, our little channel that we made. And we're going to use our safety pin on the end here to help us guide it through. So attach it and then run this through the little channel that you made. And you can feel that safety pin as you inch it along, and it helps you move your cord a little bit easier, having that nice metal piece to grab onto. So inching it down our little channel that we made. And then as it comes towards the end here, grab hold of that metal safety pin, pull it all the way out, pulling it about evenly on each side. Then we'll take our safety pin off and we'll put it on our other cord and run it across the other side. Again, just stick it through the end and close it, and then use that to guide it through your little channel here. Again, inching it along. It helps you do that with that little metal piece there. And then as you get towards the end here, you'll be able to feel the safety pin start to poke out, and you can grab hold of it and pull it out, again evenly all the way across like you did the first piece. We'll take our safety pin off just so that we can double check that we got our lengths right, and checking to make sure that I have the same length on each side when I put the ends together, and I do. So now we're going to run it through our tab here. I'll take one of my pieces, I'll apply my safety pin, and then I will put it through the tab, and you can run it up or down, it doesn't matter which. Just pulling it through, and take our safety pin off, and then we'll put our ends together and we'll tie a knot. Make a nice tight knot and pull it as far down to the end as you can. And that's nice and secure. We'll do the same thing on the other side. So we take one piece, apply our safety pin. We'll run it through the tab here. Take our safety pin off, hold our ends together, and tie a knot. And then we're ready to test out our bag. So after we get it all straightened out, we can pull our cords on either side, hold it together to finish pulling it together. And as you can see, our bag is nice and closed, and we're ready to go home with our library books. And in this way, it can be worn like a backpack. Ready to go.